I think it's worth recognising that we just can't be everyone to everybody, but who fits into what level, because we're all going to have relationships in which we're struggling and those relationships that are absolutely flourishing. The key question though is which of the relationships worth investing in most. Well, Joe's been heading north to find out a little bit more.
It's so good to be in your kitchen.
Yeah, I'm really pleased with this kitchen. I'd love to say I built it myself, but I didn't. But it's all right.
We are talking about relational well-being. So I want to know the relationship between you and your kitchen. How strong is it? How strong is the bond?
Is my wife going to see this filming?
I mean, there's a chance that she might.
I love this kitchen, and I love eating in this kitchen and enjoying all the delicious meals my wife makes in this kitchen. So I have a very strong emotional, relational bond to it.
Bond. Now, so tell me, now you've been thinking a lot about relational well-being, and I just want to know, how important is it to our overall well-being?
Well, it's interesting. You saw Milo, my cat, earlier, my lovely cat. And what's really interesting about Milo is when he was born as a little kitten, he latches onto his mum for a little bit of milk, and before you know it, weeks later, he's independent and he's away from his mum. And creatures can be a little bit like that. But when you think about when we're born completely helpless. We are dependent on others for our survival. But then I think from an emotional point of view, you could almost argue we need people to help us survive, particularly when we're very young and vulnerable. But we need relationships to thrive in terms of our emotional well-being. It's just inbuilt into our very DNA that we need people. I have to use the phrase, humans need humans.
Yeah. So not all relationships are the same. There's different kind of levels of relationship. Talk to us about what they look like and how to navigate those.
I think it's a really good question, because we do have different kinds of relationships, and you've got those very intimate, what you might call your inner circle. One of the things that I think can easily happen is we take for granted that these relationships that we have will automatically be good. And I often use this phrase, no investment, no return. And sometimes what happens is you're so busy looking after the peripheral relationships, those more social connections, sometimes those acquaintances, that sometimes then you neglect the real key relationships. And I spend a lot of time speaking at events, and one of the things that I've realised in my marriage, you know, my intimate relationship with my wife and with my two children, is that at times I thought my clients got the best of me, but my family got the dregs of me. And so, hang on a minute, you're investing in certain relationships, which is good, but at what cost, at what price? And it's important to keep on never taking those intimate, close relationships for granted. You know, there's that phrase, the grass is always greener where it's watered. And therefore, I think there needs to be, I mean, I talk about, I call it a life blend model. And part of that blend is about your work, it's about your contribution, your giving, about your recreation, but it's also about your relationships. And just being mindful, every week I will reflect on those 4 quadrants. And the one that often can get overlooked if I'm not careful is about those relationships, because we're so caught up in the pace of life and the busyness of life and the challenges that are placed on us. And yet I would say this, our biggest source of joy, as well as our biggest source of pain, comes from our relationships. It really does.
Often those relationships can cause conflict. You know, sometimes we're in relationships with people and we don't always see things the same way. How would you advise us how to navigate that?
Well, you know, I'm an absolute outstanding. Please take a sip.
Oh, thank you.
Because you are just about to. It's fine. You just blow. Okay. Just smell the aroma.
Okay, I'm smelling it.
But to illustrate what my answer to your question, in my oven, I have a beach ball.
Of course you do.
Of course you do. Where else would a man from the north keep a beach ball? But the reason why I explain this is, imagine that we've got an issue between us. We're talking about something. But what's really interesting is, from your perspective, you're seeing the same issue, this metaphor of the beach ball, but you're seeing red, yellow and orange. And as far as you're concerned, those are the three colours. You're seeing red, yellow and orange. That's your perspective. And yet I'm looking at the very same issue as you, and I'm seeing blue, white and green. And where the conflict can occur is because we believe that, well, if I'm seeing things one way and you're seeing them another, we can't be both right. One of us has to be wrong, and it's clearly not me who's wrong, it's clearly you. And yet one of the things I talk about is let's take some time out to understand and appreciate where other people are coming from, and just take a little bit of time out to understand their side of the beach ball.
Yeah.
And to appreciate that there's all kinds of things that influence why we see things differently. You know, our baggage, our beliefs, our personality, our age, even just where we're at emotionally that day. But also to recognise that it's okay sometimes to see things differently from each other, and you might not even agree ultimately. But does it mean automatically one of us has to be wrong? Because sometimes, you know, you can maybe both be right.
Yeah.
And it's about, understanding. All right, that's very kind of you. You're catching on very, very quickly. But it's about me understanding your side of the beach ball, but it's also me turning it around so you clearly see my perspective.
Yeah.
Because I think we can make an assumption that people are mind readers and they're not.
Yeah.
One of the biggest problems in terms of our relationships is, I think, at times having unrealistic expectations.
All of this stuff, when we're not getting it right, sometimes we're not seeing things from each other's perspective, it can lead to a lot of hurt and a lot of brokenness, a lot of broken relationships. How do we navigate that when it just has gone too far? And, you know, we need to stop and actually address some of the brokenness in our lives.
Sure, I think yes, we do need to forgive, but that isn't just a one moment instant act, it's an ongoing process. And I think forgiveness, believe it or not, is not actually to benefit the other person or the other party. It's ultimately to benefit you.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean you forget. It doesn't mean you instantly feel better, because it is a process to work through. But you know, there's this phrase, life can leave you bitter or it can make you better. And that ultimately is a choice, and it's a hard one because we want to punish the other person for hurting us. But I think what we don't always appreciate is that when we're trying to punish someone else, we're actually punishing ourselves even more.
Yeah. It's been really good chatting to you, Paul, and my tea's still really hot.
Oh, one little tip.
Yeah, go on.
One final tip. So don't forget, you want the beach ball
in the
on
oven.
180, 30 minutes.
Okay.
Don't make the tea too hot if it's for a southerner, because they're a little bit not as
sensitive
as men. But here's another little phrase, because we love our technology, but let me just leave you with this one. In a world of iPhones and iPads, don't ever underestimate the impact and the importance of eyeballs.
I like that.
It's a good one, isn't it?
I'm gonna use that. Can I use it?
Okay, it's even better than me tea.
Thank you.
Cheers.
It was so good chatting to Paul. I love his story, and it gives me hope that even though we might have broken, painful relationships in our lives or things that have happened to us that aren't right, we don't have to let those things define us. It's really, really great.